of the Jewish Museum of Florida-FIU. Wait till we can mute everyone. If you're not on mute, could you mute yourself? Or can you mute people, Nancy? So as Nancy said, we've been having wonderful success with our program. Thursdays at 3, part of our many efforts at becoming a fabulous virtual Jewish museum, still being able to bring you interesting programming and wonderful things to learn and to see and to look at. Today is particularly special, not only because we have a very renowned movie producer director, Billy Corben, a native Floridian, but also because he is the stepson of our fabulous museum manager, Nancy Cohen. And so I wanted to personally come on and say, welcome, Billy. We're very excited to have you as our guest today. And before we start, there you are. Welcome. I just want to say to the many of you who are here today, it is our great pleasure to keep bringing you during this time as much programming and virtual reality tours as we possibly can. But we do need your help. If you are already a member, please, please, please renew your membership. If you're not a member, please, please, please become a member at whatever level you can. It's only through your support that we're going to be able to keep the museum running and keep the museum staff on board. So Nancy's going to put our address for the website in the chat. Nancy, are you going to do that? Well, maybe she'll do it at the end. And any of you who need to renew or would like to join our family of members, we would be eternally grateful. And with that, I'm going to turn the program over to our wonderful curator, Jacqueline Goldstein, to start the program. Take it away, Jackie.
Thank you, Susan. Welcome to Thursdays at 3. And today we are so fortunate, as Susan said, to be talking with Billy Corben, very well-known, internationally well-known, director of several ESPN 30 for 30 programs, some well-known documentaries such as Limelight and Screwball and Magic City Hustle, as well as Raw Deal. We'll get into each particular films and documentaries. Billy was born in Florida, a Miami native at this point. Began as a child actor in the 1980s, was on a few pilots during his time out in Los Angeles. And his first project that he worked on was actually in high school, and it was called Waiting. And this is a great place to start, Billy. Can you tell us about Waiting?
Sure. First of all, welcome everyone. Thank you for having me, and please forgive my quarantine haircut or lack thereof. It hasn't been cut since February. It's not really a Jew fro. It's more like a Jew mullet. I think it's kind of happening here. But thank you for having me. And
it's a kosher style mullet.
Yes, live from my basement. I'm here. Joe Biden is right over there with me here in the basement. But yeah, Jacqueline, thank you for that introduction. And my producing partners and I, Alfred Spellman and David Sipkin. David, I know actually, we've known each other for so long. Our mothers used to bathe us together. We were sophomores in high school, which is weird. But no, I'm kidding. We actually knew each other from Temple Sinai preschool. Is how long I know from back in North Miami Beach, one of the few cities in America with the word beach in it, with no beach in the city. Although to be fair, I think it did have one at one time. But we met our other producing partner, Alfred Spellman, at Highland Oaks Middle School, also in NMB, in television production class, actually, is where I met Alfred. And we started working together in TV production class. We had a wonderful teacher named Sheila Spicer, who paired us up as producing partners. And we've been producing partners, in fact, ever since. And we formed our first formal production company when we were sophomores in high school. Because we were 15, we needed our our parents to be the officers of the corporation when we incorporated in the state of Florida. And we would go around to meetings in our shorts and t-shirts, and people used to think we were like messengers or something like that. But we were the guys running the company ever since we were 14, 15 years old. And
Wow.
The first project that we undertook was a script that I wrote initially I think I'd intended it for the New Playwrights Festival at New World School of the Arts, which is where I attended high school in downtown Miami. And it didn't make a very good play, so I decided to make it a movie. It was like a 35 page script. And it was about a teenage girl, a high school girl, waiting for the results of her HIV blood test. And this is now circa 1993. Not only was this an important, growing important issue, but it had just been relatively recently introduced as curriculum in Dade County public schools and in some of the public schools, at AIDS education curriculum. And so we noticed that in middle school, our teachers kind of struggled with it. They didn't know how to do it. They didn't know what to do with it. They seemed a little bit uncomfortable even addressing it. And so we thought it would be interesting to make a movie that could serve to address those needs in terms of HIV/AIDS education in public schools. And I obtained the curriculum from Miami-Dade County Public Schools, and I created a kind of a study guide that outlined how our movie corresponded to the curriculum, so that teachers could basically kind of follow along and teach right off of the movie that we made. We had a crew entirely made up of middle and high school students. That's in front of the camera and behind the camera. We got all of our equipment donated. We got a grant to produce it. And it turned out to be, incredibly, as sophomores in high school, our first internationally distributed project. First, we hustled it to the individual school boards themselves, Miami-Dade County, Broward, Monroe, and Orange counties, and Palm Beach. And then we sold it at PTA and PTSA conferences. We would get like a booth, and then eventually it got picked up by an international distribution company, educational distribution company. And that was our first official project and distributed project. Internationally distributed project, I should say.
Wow, that's really amazing. What drew you from child acting to this first documentary that you made, this first scripted documentary, I should say? What made you do the switch?
Oh, I did a film called Parenthood that I was in, that Ron Howard had directed, who himself was a successfully recovered child actor. And they actually made that movie. They shot Parenthood in Universal Studios Orlando, which is what it was called at the time. And it hadn't even been opened yet. It wasn't a functioning theme park yet. They had just built a gaggle of offices and sound stages, and they were trying to kind of legitimize the operation the way the Studio City Universal Studios theme park began its life as an actual film studio and then had the theme park component. They were trying to do the same thing in Florida. Say, yes, look, we have a real movie studio and doing production here, and now we're going to do a theme park, which of course that was a slightly less organic kind of process than it was in Studio City. But nonetheless, they were filming there. They were filming the new Leave It to Beaver. They were filming a bunch of Nickelodeon game shows. They were filming Psycho 4, which was pretty creepy because the Psycho house was actually built in the middle of nothing. It was just darkness everywhere. In the middle of the night, they had spotlights that would illuminate the Psycho house on this creepy hill. So there'd be just, literally tens of thousands of pitch black acres, and then just the Psycho house illuminated in the middle of nothing. It was petrifying.
Totally creepy. Yeah, totally.
Absolutely petrifying. And so they were filming Parenthood there. And so Ron Howard came down to Miami and was casting for some of the minor kids parts. And I wound up with a few lines and cursing, in fact, in Parenthood, in the birthday party scene and in some of the baseball scenes with the kids. And I think that was the first time I kind of took notice of the role of a director, and particularly because growing up and watching like Nick at Night and seeing the Andy Griffith Show and seeing Happy Days, I knew Ron Howard as an actor, and here he was as a director. And I thought that was very inspiring. I thought that, when I was a child actor, as you said, that always was like an after school hobby for me. it didn't strike me as a career. It was more like, this is something I'm doing after school instead of playing sports, because I wasn't very athletically inclined. My brother was the athlete in the family, so he would play sports after school, and I would go out on auditions and do movies and TV shows and commercials. And so but I knew at some point, much like t-ball or like ballet for kids, like you grow out of it and then you move on with your life. But that was the first time I think I recognized that there might be a career opportunity in this, when I watched Ron Howard doing that. And his whole family was there. It was a family affair. Ron Howard's brother was in the movie. His father has a cameo in the movie. His wife and daughter, I think, are in a shot of, like, so they were always around. And it was like a very homey kind of atmosphere. And it seemed like maybe this was an interesting thing to do. And so that was became my interest in directing. And so years after is when we started that production company and made Waiting.
Wow. So one of your first achievements besides Waiting, which sounds absolutely amazing, creating those study guides for the school. I know you were the first youngest director to be invited to show at the Sundance in 2001 for your film Raw Deal, which was, pretty controversial subject to tackle. How did you guys decide to work with that?
Well, living in Miami, of course, we have a lot of anywhere in Florida, you have a lot of friends who wind up going off to one of the flagship state schools, FSU, UF. And so we had quite a few friends from the old neighborhood, who went on to the University of Florida in Gainesville, the old name of the shtetl, as we called Highland Lakes. So we had some friends who were at UF, and we started hearing in the spring of 1999, we started hearing about the case of an exotic dancer who she and a friend had been hired to perform at the Delta Chi fraternity house at Greek Row in Gainesville. And she had claimed that she had been sexually assaulted by one of the fraternity men, and that the entire night's events had been captured on videotape. And right around this time, my producing partner, Alfred Spellman, this was kind of the dawn of the digital video era. You had projects like the Blair Witch Project, Chuck and Buck Series 7, and a lot of movies that were being released theatrically in movie theaters, but that had been shot on digital video as opposed to film. And so Alfred has always kind of kept us on the cutting edge of technology and new technology and advancements in distribution and in production. And that was a significant kind of moment, because it was the democratization of production. The cameras were now more affordable. They were smaller. They were easier to operate than film cameras were. Film had a significant barrier to entry. You needed access to expensive equipment. You needed expertise to operate it. You didn't just have videotape. You had film that you would then, everybody remembers their old film cameras. You had to go to Eckerd and get it developed. It was a very similar process. You had very expensive reels of film going to very expensive cameras that you really needed to be an expert to operate. And then you'd have to turn around and get that film developed. It was a very convoluted and expensive process. So with digital video, it sort of reduced everything to videotape, and again, everything it was a democratization of production. It was a lot easier. The barrier to entry to be able to shoot a high quality production was increased. And so we were able to produce. And also what was happening at the same time, of course, is DSL. That was the first high speed internet. And we realized that internet was, of course, had already, even with dial-up and AOL, had already changed the fate, I think, of the postal service. It was, it was changing the fate of the print media business. And then you could see it with Napster, and higher speed internet was democratizing distribution in all of these different formats. First the written word, then music. And we knew eventually it was going to get faster and faster and change the way that people watched and, exhibited video and film content as well. So we wanted to sort of try to keep up or be slightly ahead of the curve if possible. So Alfred said, let's do a video project, a project on digital video. And I said, well, it seems to lend itself better to a documentary filmmaking, which is not something we'd ever really done before outside of the morning news at Highland Oaks Middle School, TV production. but we had only done scripted stuff at that point. And I was in fact at University of Miami studying political science and screenwriting. And so the idea of doing a documentary was not unusual in that we were very interested in history, in politics, in true crime, and were fans of documentary films, but we had never studied documentary filmmaking before. But when Alfred said, let's do a digital video project, it seemed like the organic thing to do, because when you watch video versus film, even if you're not a cinephile or don't understand the technical implications of it, you watch video and you go, okay, well, this doesn't feel like the warmth of film and the grain of film. And so documentary, though, was something that people were already accustomed to seeing TV news, for example, on video. So it seemed to make sense that nonfiction was a good place to go. And so we had heard about this story from our friends. Alfred had said we should make a video, we should do a production on digital video. I said it should be a documentary, and it's just sort of like the perfect storm. The fates aligned, and we took a leave of absence from college. We got some angel investors, moved up to Gainesville to a month-to-month apartment. So we got the idea to do this in January of 2000. We moved up to Gainesville maybe April of 2000. And by January of 2001, we were premiering at the Sundance Film Festival. So it was a pretty extraordinary turnaround for a couple of 21-year-old or a few 21-year-old kids.
It's absolutely amazing how you did post-production and got everything ready for January.
We didn't actually. I'm editing the movie. We edited on one of the first versions ever of Final Cut Pro, and it was very glitchy, and the technology was very, very rough in those stages. And so not only through the technical problems, we're also trying to edit our first documentary. And I remember, and of course we had no reputation at that time. No one at Sundance knew who the hell we were. And they just knew that they did not have our master. The print traffic division of the film festival knew they didn't have our movie. They had, the programmers had screened a rough cut, we got accepted, but nobody had our movie. And at that point, we were like 7-8 days away from our world premiere at the festival. We were the first movie to sell out all of our screenings, so there was a lot of buzz about it, but Sundance did not have our movie to physically screen yet. And my producing partner, Alfred Spellman, calls me up and he says, I'll never forget this. We still use this phrase today. Because it's a real thing with nonlinear editing is you're editing on a computer, which means you can constantly go back and you can constantly fiddle and futz with it. And so I wasn't done. I kept saying, I'm not done with the movie yet. I'm not done. He's like, I'm not finished. I'm not finished. He says, you don't have to finish. You just have to stop. And then when we come back from Sundance, you can finish the movie or continue working on the movie. And that gave me the peace of mind necessary to take a deep breath, stop working on the movie, output it to make the master for Sundance. And then I had to go to the Burlington Coat Factory because I didn't own any gear for Utah. It's all in Park City, Utah. So I'd grown up in Miami my whole life. I didn't even know what a parka was. So my mom and I went to the Burlington Coat Factory, which at that time was only at Sawgrass Mills. That was like the only one. So we schlepped to Sawgrass Mills and went to the Burlington Coat Factory, which is just a horrible place. If you've ever been there, it's just like, there's like a pile of shoes over here and a pile of glasses over here and sunglasses over here. It's a terrible place. And like, I walked out with like 2 mismatched shoes and I think like a coat with different length sleeves, and it was just a mess. But we went to Sundance and it was an extraordinary experience. Very controversial movie, wound up on the front page of the New York Post with it. Did about 5 or 6 interviews. I'm sorry, in about 5 or 6 days, we did like 60 interviews.
Wow.
The last question of every single interview was, so now that you guys have made it, you've arrived, so to speak, are you going to move to New York or LA? Where are you going to move? And we said, well, no, we're going to go back to Miami. Just as obvious to them as it was that we would move to New York or LA, it was just as obvious to us that we would come back to Miami for several reasons. First of all, this is home. And home is where you go when you're done with other stuff. And so we were coming home. Second, we had worked on this movie nonstop for over a year at this point. So we didn't really know what we were going to do next. And third, we had this idea that Miami and Florida, Florida in particular, or Florida and Miami in particular, were just ripe, for characters and stories, a real untapped or only partially tapped resource. And so we wanted to tie in our brand with where we were from. We wanted to be the Miami filmmakers, or, you know, the Miami guys. So just as a branding thing, we didn't want to be three more schmucks peddling our wares in New York or LA. We wanted to become associated with our geography in the same way, you know, Barry Levinson is associated with Baltimore, or David Simon for that matter, or any litany of filmmakers. Martin Scorsese, Spike Lee, Woody Allen are associated with New York, M. Night Shyamalan in Philly and Pennsylvania, Kevin Smith in New Jersey, Richard Linklater, and Robert Rodriguez in Austin. Like, you just associate that, we just, oh, those guys. So that's what set us off on the path to Cocaine Cowboys, is we were looking for a calling card movie. Raw Deal, A Question of Consent was a Florida true crime story, but we wanted a Miami story to put us on the map and to be our calling card as the Miami filmmakers. And so it was originally called City Made of Snow, about Miami during the cocaine boom in the 1980s, and the thesis that the narco dollars generated in that illicit trade in that era really, I call it the only successful case study of Reagan's trickle-down economics, was Miami during the drug boom in the 80s, where you legitimately had the money trickling down from the top into impacting every class and every facet of society, and eventually coming into infrastructure and really sprouting, you know, feeding and sprouting the skyline and the city that we know and love, where a lot of people love to hate or hate to love. I think everybody outside of Miami loves to hate Miami, and everybody in Miami hates to love Miami. I think that's the best way to describe that.
That's sounds pretty accurate. I mean, that's what I've seen. I'm New York born and raised, and coming down here 100%. Let me see if I can get us a clip of Cocaine Cowboys. Where is it here?
Miami a hustle city, man. Ain't sport. You're gonna be a piece of cake.
Hold on, let's go back. Okay.
Miami a hustle city,
I'm
man.
hearing Magic City Hustle, but singing is still from Cocaine Cowboys.
Ice cream, ready to sell the CDs. One stop, one out. I've been doing music. When I was done being an NFL player, I was able to become a police officer, an actor too as well, and model. I'm not your neighborhood Uber driver. I do
Not working.
I have another job. I play highlight. We in the house. We were looking to transition from dog racing to highlight.
Hold on a second. I pulled this into what I'm going to show you towards the end. Let me see if I can get us back to, I don't know why this is pulling up. Okay, I'm not getting
Went to the university.
All right, so I don't know what happened to my Cocaine Cowboys clip, but it definitely, when I first saw it, it really brought home for me, you know, the Wild West that was happening in the 80s in Miami, and with all the drug trafficking and the narcos. And where did you guys get the clips for that?
There's an extraordinary resource here in South Florida. It's called the Wilson, Florida Moving Image Archive. It used to be in technically the basement of the main library in downtown Miami. And now it's located in one of the newer buildings at the Wilson campus of Miami-Dade College. And it's an incredible place where they have just acquired through the decades an archive of local news packages dating back to the 60s and 70s. They've also collected various family films and archives and collections of people from Miami dating back, I think, to the 40s and 30s and even beyond. And it's just an amazing resource, not only for local filmmakers, but filmmakers all over the country and all over the world have depended upon this. The CNN movie about Elian Gonzalez, of course, anything that has a Florida connection, and sort of everything invariably has a Florida connection. So this, the Wilson or Florida Moving Image Archive has been an incredible resource. And that was all of where we acquired the local news material, which was absolutely amazing and disturbing. Also, you know, you grow up in Miami watching the local news at 5 o'clock and beyond every evening, while mom makes dinner and you're sitting at the kitchen table doing homework. And day after day, I think it doesn't soak in what's actually happening. And then when we get the opportunity to acquire dozens of hours of it and get to kind of create the synthesis journalism of Cocaine Cowboys, you're watching all this footage and you're thinking, what the hell were my parents thinking raising children down here at that time? Is what you start thinking. It was not necessarily the safest place in that era, and so I had some funny conversations with my parents about about that and what their perception was at the time. Because Miami is interesting. I think the common misconception is that we're a melting pot, but I don't think that's true. I think we're far more akin to a Seder plate, where sometimes the horosis falls into the parsley. You know what I mean? Like we kind of self-segregate and divide ourselves and in such a way where things that are happening in different neighborhoods or different municipalities don't have any bearing on us, several miles away. So people don't seem to care about it. And so, or they think it doesn't affect their lives. And I think Miami is like, it's very tribal. It's like Game of Thrones with better weather and iguanas instead of dragons, I think is what it is. Just very tribal and very, and I think not particularly empathetic. I like people in Homestead don't care about people in Miami Lakes, and people in Miami Lakes don't care about people in Hialeah, and people in Hialeah don't care about people in Liberty City, and people in Liberty City don't care about Aventura, and Aventura doesn't care about anybody. But that's true of many of the municipalities, but I joke about Aventura. I think that's problematic. I think that people don't realize that Miami is a shared experience. It's a collective experience. Like we all sit in the same traffic. We're all experiencing the same inconveniences. I don't know why turn signals don't work here. I don't know. I don't know why. I think that's why they call it Miami. It's not your Emmy or our Emmy. It's my friggin' Emmy. It's mine. And so people kind of behave in a very myopic and selfish way. But again, that makes things interesting for us as storytellers because there's a lot of Florida fuckery and there's a lot of conflict and eccentricities about this location that also make it very important, because I think that the Miami of today is the America of tomorrow. And if you want to know what challenges we'll face or what calamities will befall us as a nation in the years to come, you need only look at Miami. And I think that really bears out not only in our work itself, but in the international interest and popularity of our work, because these documentaries that we make could be deemed provincial, but they're not PBS documentaries. They are documentaries that appear all over the world on international platforms and in theaters. And we just knew this was part of the calculation, Jacqueline, the idea that we were going to tie in our brand to Miami, because Miami itself is a brand of international import. And people are legitimately interested in what happens here. And so that has obviously, that gamble has paid off for us.
Oh, did you have any, you're looking at 20 years after the fact, basically. Did you have any pushback when you were making the film? Was everybody really receptive to talking at that point 20 years later?
Well, yeah, the nostalgia seems to come in these 20-year cycles, whether it's drug trends, whether it's people sort of interested in music or fashion, people who grew up with it kind of grew up in it, become older and become interested in it again, or want to share it with their kids. So things were kind of coming around to all things Miami 80s again. It was Scarface's anniversary. It was a hugely popular re-release. The most popular video game of all time at that time, 04, 05, when we started working on Cocaine Cowboys, was called Grand Theft Auto Vice City, which was entirely in a Miami 1980s milieu. Michael Mann had announced that he was finally going to do the long-awaited Miami Vice movie adaptation with Jamie Foxx. And so things seem to be, that nostalgia cycle seemed to be rolling around. And it also seemed to be far enough removed where people had we're able to look back on the good old bad old days with some Barbra Streisand gauze filter and say, oh, wasn't that crazy and fun and romantic in its own piratey kind of dangerous way. So Access was, we call it a story ripening. And if a story doesn't ripen, if it's too soon, if the wounds are too fresh, usually people might not want to talk about it, but we seem to be, we hit a sweet spot there with Cocaine Cowboys. I will say there was a little bit of pushback at first to our thesis that drug money, you know, that the narco economy really helped to develop Miami. A little tiny bit, not a lot, but just a little bit. But then I think as people sort of started to work it out and think it through, they came around. By the time the movie started airing on, you know, Netflix, Showtime, CNBC, people started to say, okay, well, maybe that makes a little bit of sense.
Wow, that's really interesting. I mean, I love that you're so Miami-centric. It's really showing so many people so much about our town. I consider it my hometown right now. Speaking of Miami, so you, in 2009, came out with The U, which is one of your many ESPN 30 for 30s documentaries that you did. And this really, again, in the 1980s, talks about Miami basically as being, I don't want to say all white, but not as multicultural as it is today. And the coach at the time, Howard Schnellenberger, basically recruiting African-American players from, you know, basically Miami City, the story of that. And first, why did you choose Miami? It's because you're a Miami native, or the story, and that story particularly fascinating?
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, growing up in Miami, I had attended some of those games at the Orange Bowl with my dad, and wanting to do, having done Cocaine Cowboys and been very obviously intrigued with the world of Miami in the 1980s. And part of that reason is because we grew up here, and when you're little kids, like, you don't necessarily know exactly what's going on, you know? And so you want to kind of examine what life was like in your community when you were kids, and get to understand it better, which is exactly what we were trying to do. And so the U gave us that opportunity also, again, to examine our community and to look at the racial tensions in the community, and to look at how the University of Miami football program worked to kind of to try to ease those tensions, or at least bring a little bit more opportunity and hope into parts of Miami that had been ravaged by not one, not two, but 3 race riots and demonstrations over the course of the 1980s.
Let me interrupt. I want to see if I can get the clip for that.
Sure.
Hold on.
Let's see.
I know. Okay.
Let's see.
I'm sharing. Where is it? Let me try. Okay. Where is it? Okay.
Try to make your screen bigger, Jackie.
Okay.
One of the reasons why they don't have microphones anymore.
Winston Moss at the coin toss, him, Jerome Alonso.
And the coin toss was on national television.
They refused to shake hands.
I distinctly remember the officials threatening to throw a flag on us if we did not shake your opponent's hand. Some of the language that was said there, the coin toss, it was just not right.
Gentlemen, to make the toss as the visitor. It's a head, and it's a tail.
It was very, very, very rated X. The TV cameras picked that up.
And I was in the press, I was watching, I'm going, that's unbelievable. We are going to take a shellacking for that.
Jerome and Lazo, those guys, they really did shock America.
If I can intimidate you and get in your head before we even kick the ball off, I won that battle. Miami, you have your choice of kick receiving or defending the goal. You will receive. They are going to receive.
We didn't care. You know what? We didn't have to toss a coin because we're going to give you the ball. You can have the ball. We're going to let our defense come out and smack you in the mouth, and then we'll let the offense take over from there.
Bosworth and his friends cannot blow the house down. Instead, it is then he tests the verdict. Bosworth can't believe it.
We high-fived, we finger-pointed, and we talked trash.
We were the Ali's of that era. Not only are we going to beat you up, we're going to talk to you while we're beating you up.
Some pushing and shoving on the far side. Breaks out. Now both teams rush over there. Oh, I hate to see this. It is a shame to see an ugly incident. More on what has been high football game between numbers 1 and 2.
Canes, it just took nobody, and I like that.
When Miami was on the field, they were nasty. They'd spit, they'd fight, they'd bite, they'd kick, they'd do whatever it took to win. The crowd is chanting a little melody toward Brian Bosworth. The Canes at number 1.
You know, I don't want a bunch of guys on my team that are bankers or a bunch of guys on my team that are lawyers. I want a guy on my team that's going to fight for me on the football field and off the football field.
The guy from another team we played against, we goes, man, even the white dudes in your team are tough.
We're going to win the game, and if you want to fight in the parking lot, you're going to fight that too.
And here come the Gamecocks, and we got a free for all. There's a saying when recruiting's going on. Is he a Miami guy? A Miami guy is a guy that plays the game with a chip on his shoulder. What set off the fight, Daniel Stubbs, even after the whistle, threw Todd Ellis
So,
down like it was AWA wrestling.
No more hurricanes. They wanted us off the schedule. They were like, no more. We're not playing these guys anymore.
They wasn't ready for that in Cargill. Oh,
How do
man,
I
these
get out
guys
of
are a
this?
little rough on the edges.
sorry about that. So, number one, tell us about what prompted you to make that film. You were at Miami, correct?
Hello, everyone. I have something to ask you.
I had
I don't know what
Name
that
to
is.
join my
Uncle
campaign.
Joe's in the basement here with me. Don't you? No, that's the pre-roll ad, the Joe Biden pre-roll ad that's like on every YouTube video right now. But I graduated from the University of Miami. The documentary was originally called Hurricane Season when we pitched it to ESPN. There's another movie around that time period though that had that title, and so we changed it. ESPN changed it actually. The executive over there, Keith Klingscales, brilliantly came up with the title "The U," which I think was the far better title, obviously. And we pitched it to them as just a story of Miami in the '80s. As I'd said, there was three separate incidents over the course of the decade in which white or Hispanic police officers had shot and killed, beaten or shot and killed unarmed black men. And it happened in '79, it happened in '84, it happened in '89. And what followed were violent demonstrations. The inner city of Miami burned. And while that was happening is when the University of Miami's kind of decade of dominance began. And so we wanted to tell that story set against the backdrop of Miami, which I think is a unique place, as I've already said, but it's a unique place also racially, because the unfortunate tradition is that African Americans are treated like second-class citizens in most American cities. But in Miami-Dade, because we are a majority minority county, African Americans are treated like third-class citizens in this community after Cuban Americans and Anglos. And so we have not underserved communities, but entirely unserved communities in the African American neighborhoods of Miami-Dade. And so we wanted to tell that story, which we also continued to tell in modern day with our Dawg Fight documentary about unsanctioned bare-knuckle brawls in backyards in West Brine. So it's sort of a continuing thread in our work to kind of shine a spotlight on parts of our county that I think are not necessarily seen a lot in TV and film. I mean, listen, even when they go to, Miami Gardens is one of the poorest cities in Miami-Dade and amongst the poorest and most dangerous in the country. And that's where the Miami Dolphins and the Miami Hurricanes play at Joe Robbie Stadium, as most of us still call it. And when you're watching a televised football game there, they go from the field to the blimp shot overhead, and then they cut to a shot on Ocean Drive, as if the stadium is in Miami Beach. Ocean Drive is 18 miles away from that stadium. So no love for Miami Gardens on television. I mean, if people outside of Miami think that Miami is 10 blocks of Ocean Drive between 5th and 15th, and that the colonies, like in the Cleveland, are the only hotels, in town. You'd think that from the outside looking in. And so we wanted to kind of, hang a lantern on some of the more underserved and underexposed parts of our community.
Well, you definitely did that in that movie. So you went and sought out the former players. Were they still living around here?
Oh yeah, a lot of them were. Some of them had moved on, but quite a few actually were still local. And interestingly, Melvin Bratton, Mel Bratton was not local at the time, but get this, he comes into town and we are filming his interview at a studio off of Biscayne Boulevard. And one of our co-producers goes out to pick him up. He's waiting for us to come and get him and bring him inside. He's on Biscayne Boulevard, and they grab him and they're walking down and they're passing a bus stop, and a bus stops there, and the driver opens the door and she looks down, and as Melvin Bratton is walking along, she goes, "Hey, you, did you used to play for Northwestern, the high school team?" He said, "Yes, ma'am, I did." He goes, "I remember you. I used to watch you." That was like 20 years, 30 years earlier. And she recognized him walking down the street, decades later, which is sort of incredible. And it goes to show what kind of local celebrities these guys had been at the time.
It was such an important era, really changing the scene of Miami's football team.
And the city itself.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
I think Miami 1980 is probably one of the most significant years in the history of any American city. I think you can look to that year and certainly the rest of the decade as setting the tone for what I said, before as T.D. Ullman would say, Miami, the city of the future. The idea that the Miami of today is the America of tomorrow. And if you look at Miami in 1980, it very much looks like America today. Scandals over immigration, police misconduct, race demonstrations, drug wars, culture wars, the English-only ordinance. All of these culture wars and societal shifts that America now seems to be confronting and dealing with and exploding. And that was all set on a backdrop of one of the most, liberal presidents in American history running against a presidential election year in 1980, running against a B-movie actor turned conservative politician whose campaign slogan was "Let's make America great again." That was Ronald Reagan. So Miami 1980 is a very kind of, I think, very significant moment in American history.
Absolutely. So I know besides the 30 for 30s in Miami, you also hit my former hometown, New York, 2 times, one with Limelight and one on the A-Rod, Alexander Rodriguez doping scandal. On a personal note, Limelight was the first club I ever went to in 1989. So when I saw that you did an expose on Peter Gatmian and the club, how did that come about? I mean, it's so, different from the Miami.
Yeah, we were contacted by Peter Gation's daughter, Jennifer Gation, and she is an independent film producer and documentary filmmaker in her own right. And she had seen Cocaine Cowboys and liked the work and liked the take and liked how we kind of took the Cocaine Cowboys I always describe as a mosaic where each of the interviews and people that we discuss, whether it's the godmother or a reporter or a lawyer or a drug smuggler or an enforcer, a hitman, a homicide detective, narcotics officer, they're all individual tiles. And then when you zoom out, the mosaic has formed downtown, the skyline, the city of Miami or the county of Dade. And so she liked that. And she wanted to see her father's story being the creator and operator of the largest nightclub empire in New York history, told against the backdrop of the culture wars and the Giuliani era in New York. And that shift from a kind of party town into into sort of Disney World, when 42nd Street goes from peep shows to Lion King, you know, and that's really what Peter seemed to get caught up in. He was sort of caught in the middle of that with his clubs. And so it seemed to be an interesting story. She saw a lot of parallels in the storytelling of Cocaine Cowboys. And that's how we came to go to Toronto and meet Peter and do his interviews and tell that story.
Wow, it's such a fascinating story. And what happened to Gatchian after Limelight closed and tried to reopen and closed again, and when it couldn't be Avalon? What was the final with Peter?
Peter was deported. He had never become an American citizen. And so even though he was acquitted of the criminal charges against him, when the laws changed after 9/11, Giuliani, they managed to stick it to him one way or another. And they black bagged him and tossed him in immigration prison and shipped him back to Canada. And I think that Limelight is like, it was like a gym. For a while, it was an IHOP. It was a mini mall. It was very, very much in keeping with the contemporary Chelsea tradition, I think, of mallification. First it was gentrification. Now it's mallification.
I mean, it's a great story. Really, I don't know if people are not familiar with New York City, but Limelight was a club that was home in a former church cathedral. So it was really
a Gothic, deconsecrated, is that what they call it? A church, this Gothic historic church, which is very cavernous and dark and cool. Didn't have any Meyer Lansky stained glass windows, but it had some very eerie, stained glass artwork. And it was a wild place, I imagine, to go to a nightclub. And it was interesting also because it had so many different entrances on different streets also, because it's on a corner. And so what they could do is they could have different promoters promoting different parties. So you'd have over here the Club Kids, which was a very LGBTQ kind of scene. But then in front, you'd have like kids from Staten Island coming in, and then you'd have like an H.R. Geiger art show in the back door. But what would happen is they'd all actually come into and commingle in the same venue. And it actually kind of helped to sort of, bring disparate elements of New York subcultures, I think, together. And then once everybody started getting into ecstasy, everybody was just loving everybody, and massaging everyone and dancing with everyone. And, it was quite a scene, I'm sure. And I'm sure you had nothing to do with any of that kind of stuff.
Nothing. All right. And then if we move you back into ESPN, so you stayed up looking at New York with Screwball. We'll fast forward you a couple of years later with Alexander, what we call A-Rod on the Yankees. Why did you guys go for that one? Not come back down to Miami?
Well, I mean, that is a Miami story, obviously. Well, Miami.
A-Rod, right, now with J-Lo. But
what do you guys call it? You call it the sixth borough. Isn't that what you call Miami? So, no, but this was a Miami story because A-Rod's steroid doctor, I do doctor in air quotes because he was not a real doctor. He went to medical school in Belize, some kind of 2-year program, which one of our interview subjects in the documentary jokingly referred to as the Belize School of the Medical and Performing Arts. And so he was practicing medicine without a license, and he was writing prescriptions with other doctors, in fact, in some cases, dead doctors, prescription pads and DEA numbers, and going to compounding pharmacies and creating concoctions of testosterone and various other vitamin supplements that he was peddling. And that was
did the Yankees know about any of this while he was playing up in New York?
I think people suspected some things, and I think in some circles it was an open secret. But this was all in a strip mall on US 1 and Alhambra Circle, right across the street, actually, the other side of US 1 from the University of Miami and what is now, I guess, Alex Rodriguez Field at Mark Light Stadium. So it was happening right there, kind of out in the open. But I think it was a word of mouth thing. And so, again, in some circles, they were aware of it. Were the Yankees aware of it? I don't know. I mean, they certainly, when the scandal erupted as a result of a huge expose in the Miami New Times that Tim Elfrink and Gus Garcia Roberts did, Tim's now with the Washington Post, the Yankees were very quick to to try to null and void their their contract with Alex Rodriguez, who I think they still owed very tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars more. But I think the interesting thing about Screwball and why we're so attracted to it is that it wasn't sort of like a serious steroids movie, you know, like an anabolic steroids movie, like you've seen in the past, or one of these Lance Armstrong stories. It was kind of this irreverent, almost Elmore Leonard, Coen Brothers, Carl Hyacin-esque, only in Miami story, because the backstory to it, people know the Alex Rodriguez story, but the truth is that Alex Rodriguez's career, I mean, he's a $400+ million player, the highest paid player in baseball history. His career was ended over a $4,000 debt between a cocaine addicted fake doctor and his fake tan addicted steroid patient. So that's like the only in Miami element of it that sort of, it's this weird kind of surreal heist movie. And I think we did it in a very irreverent and comical fashion. We call it our first documentary comedy.
Okay.
Yeah, which is what I like about so much. So documentary is not a genre. Documentary is just a style of filmmaking, nonfiction filmmaking, you know, but it's not, I say it's not a genre because documentaries, you can make a documentary in any genre. So any movie genre that you love sports movies or action movies or science fiction movies or romance movies or comedies, or you name a genre or action movies, you name a genre that you love. And there are seminal films in that genre that are documentaries, that are nonfiction films. You can tell true stories with real people, about real people, in a very cinematic and compelling way, in any genre. Music, you like music films or musicals. There are tons of musical documentaries. So it's just it's a genre. It's a style of filmmaking that, and you know, a lot of filmmakers, people say, oh, that director, she does great comedies and he does great science fiction movies. You get typecast very easy. I think there's not a ton of directors who like Billy Wilder, who wrote and directed a seminal film in almost every genre. You know, there's not a lot of those filmmakers. But as a documentarian, people may stereotype you as or typecast you as a documentarian, but nobody says, oh, she only makes sports documentaries, or he only makes, you know, action sports documentaries or music. As a documentary filmmaker, you can pick any genre and any story or character and tell a story, and nobody bats an eye. Nobody says, oh, that's not really your milieu, or you know, it's just wide open. And certainly in Florida, in South Florida in particular, there's no shortage of colorful characters and stories to tell.
Where can we get these movies?
If you go to
Netflix or...
Yeah, well, Screwball is now streaming on Netflix. Actually, if you just go to cocainecowboys.com, it'll redirect you to our company website, which is rakontur.com. But cocainecowboys.com is just easier to remember, I think.
How do you spell rakontur?
Rakontur. It's spelled phonetically. But cocainecowboys.com will redirect you to our website, and you can find all of our projects and there.
Okay, what's next? Was Magic City Hustle your most recent one?
Yeah, anybody who's driven around town in the last year or so perhaps have seen those billboards that say MagicCityHustle.com. MagicCityHustle.com is our latest feature documentary about a group of University of Miami athletes. Former University of Miami athletes, some of them 10, 15, 20 years former athletes who get a new career or a new opportunity to become professional athletes by being highlight players at the Magic City Casino. And it's this very kind of like Bad News Bears or Cool Runnings kind of tale of these guys who, some of whom are past their prime, some of whom are in outstanding shape, but none of whom had ever played, in some cases never even heard of highlight before. Some of them thought it said Jalala when they saw the email looking for former UM athletes to try out for a new highlight team at Magic City Casino. So it's kind of this funny story, but it's also very inspiring, I think, about these guys some of whom are still playing highlight at Magic City Casino. I think they're in like their third season almost, but we followed them throughout their entire first season.
Did they get into it? Did they get into it?
Well, I will say they start off as the world's worst highlight players. Like highlight is not a sport you can just pick up. I mean, it's out of Basque Spain, and it feels to me like it's like almost like, you know, it's like baseball in a lot of South America, or even football in the inner city of Miami. Like you're a little kid and someone puts a ball in your hand. It's the same thing, I think, in Basque Spain. Like they put a cesta on your hand when you're single digits. And so it becomes sort of an extra appendage. When you put that hook, it's like this sort of like hook-like basket on your hand, it's very counterintuitive. It's hard to catch. It's hard to throw because the ball isn't going where you think it's going. So some of the former lacrosse players seem to adapt better to it. The baseball players a little bit not as easy, and the football players much more difficult. Some of the track and field guys were able to adapt, so a lot of it has to do with stamina and kind of fast bursts of energy. And it was just really interesting to watch them kind of adapt to this new game and to hear kind of their stories about, like, some of them got to be professional athletes and never quite achieved the heights in their career they had hoped. Some of them after college never had an opportunity to go pro. And so this is really the fulfillment of a lifelong dream for a lot of these guys. And so like I said, it was very inspiring to see them go after it and try to win some money. There's a lot of money at stake in the game, so that's pretty fun too. And there's a lot of just really wonderful guys and really, really likable people that I met on the project, and that I think the audience kind of falls in love with over the course of the movie.
Were you there from the ground up when they were first getting the emails during the search, or did you kind of come in the middle of the season?
We came in pre-season, but a couple months after what you were describing. So after the email, after they had we came in at the end of training. Okay. And they were terrible. So I can't even imagine how shitty they were when they first started. I mean, these guys didn't know what a cesta was. They didn't know what a pelota was, which is the ball. And they didn't, and it's a dangerous game too. The ball is really hard and really goes really fast. And people get their skulls cracked and lose eyes playing this game. So, and certainly a lot of teeth. So it was a little scary, like, because sometimes our camera people would be on the court with them while they were practicing, and it was treacherous. I'd be like, get out of there. Come on the other side of the net for crying out loud.
Right. It's scary to watch. I've seen highlight, and it's like, I was a lacrosse player, and it's like lacrosse on steroids. It's great.
The world's fastest sport.
Is that right?
That's what they call it. Yeah.
And so you said a lot of the players are now on their third season?
I think so. I think I lost count. I think they may have started their third season already. And a lot of them gotten better. It's a lot of fun. I've been to the casino and I watched them, and it's like a fun night out. It's like, it's a cheap date, and and they're pretty easy to handicap because the players are, I mean, it's easy to kind of watch them practice and see who the good and bad players are. So I go out and I win a little bit of money. It's fun.
So what's next? Are you doing any more 30 for 30s for HBO?
We're doing a project.
Sorry, for ESPN, yeah.
Yeah, we're not doing anything for ESPN at the moment, but we are doing a new project that I cannot talk about. But I will tell you, to watch your TV guide for October 21st on HBO. That's all I can say.
Medication is always on Monday.
And medication is always on Monday. That's what I heard. I don't know.
And what was really quickly, I wanted to ask you about Dawg Fight. That was back in Miami in 2015. What happened with the guys in the movie? Were they arrested? This was about the underground fighting in mainland Miami.
Yeah.
So,
so Dawg Fight, Dawg Fight, I should just clarify, is spelled DAWG. When people heard we were working on a documentary called Dawg Fight, they thought it was a 30 for 30 about Michael Vick. It is not that kind of dog fighting. It's basically human dog fighting or human cockfighting in backyards in West Perrine in Southwest Miami-Dade. And
did you go and watch the fights?
We did. We filmed quite a few of the events. They're almost like kind of block parties or street festivals in the neighborhood. Like everybody just comes into this one backyard. It's kind of unique. It's almost like it's like how to describe it? It's like a suburban ghetto in Perrine. There's like no pools, so like there's and some of the houses are very modest in size, and so some of them have a significant amount of yard space. And so there was one such property with a little greenhouse on it, known as the Little Greenhouse in the neighborhood. And then you had like this, fraction of an acre of just wide open field that they planted 4 stakes in the ground and built a ring, an actual ring. And then they cover the chain link fence with a blue tarp so that you can't see into the yard from the outside. And when that blue tarp goes up, that's when the neighborhood knows the fight's on, and people start to converge on the lot. And they had this guy Dada 5000, Dafir Harris. He became the Don King of the backyards, where he would organize. This is his mom's greenhouse in her backyard, and Dada would organize the fights, promote them. He'd put the card together. He'd weigh them in on his mom's bathroom scale, the fighters. And then they would just fight there's no rounds, no time limit, bare knuckles. It's pretty brutal, and pretty scary at times, because you saw guys go down, like knocked out, like lights out, and you weren't sure if they would get up.
Because they're not using any gloves or any protection, right?
No. And some of these guys would go right to the ER to get stitched up after a fight, because it wasn't like any medical team standing by or anything. It was pretty, it got frightening at times. And the really frightening thing about it was, of course, what it said about America, that in these communities, these young men thought that this was their best chance and their best hope to make some money, to see their fight footage put online, and hopefully maybe get discovered by a professional boxing or MMA, mixed martial arts trainer or promoter, and then go pro and have a chance to, get a paycheck in some professional fights. A lot of these guys were former military. Some of them had criminal records, and so it was difficult for them to get legitimate employment. And so it was sort of this, we did it in the kind of style of an 80s action movie. The score is a very kind of Bill Conti, Rocky 70s kind of vibe to it stylistically. But inherently it's sort of an American tragedy, that there are places in America where Thunderdome exists, basically. And that's the economic reality in Miami-Dade County. Miami of today is the America of tomorrow. The income gap and the divide between the haves and the have-nots in this town is farther and growing faster than in almost any community in the country. And I think it's a reflection of where America is headed.
Unfortunately, right. Do you think you're going to stay down in Miami and keep going with the Miami films?
At some point, we're all going to higher ground, Jacqueline. What choice have they left us? I don't see Phil Levine's pumps doing their job quite the way they were promised. So I think we all are going to have to we're all going to have to move to Hialeah. Hialeah is going to be waterfront property soon, is what I suspect. So if you want a bay view, you'll look in Glenvar Heights or West Perrine or Homestead. I think I'll stay down here for a time, and even if and when I flee, I think we'll continue to tell Florida-centric and Miami-centric stories.
Excellent. I'm glad to hear that. It was really a pleasure having you on today, Billy. I'm sorry we don't have time for questions and answers, but if anybody does have a question for Billy, just send them. You can send them right to me even. My email is jacgolds@fiu.edu, and I will certainly forward along to Billy.
I'm happy to do a few. If you want to do a few now, I'm happy to do a few.
Does anybody have any quick questions? Somebody put something in the chat if you have.
Lightning round. We'll do lightning. Yes and no. Multiple choice or yes and no. True and false questions.
Just before we get to this lightning round, in case anybody has to go, I want to make sure to thank Dan and Merle Weiss for their great support of Thursdays at 3. They're the sponsors of this program, and I know they're here with us today, so thank you so much for enabling this. And now go with your lightning round.
Well, it looks like the only comment was love pouring in. Oh, we do have one. Okay. It says, will you do theater?
Oh, more theater.
That says Meyer, but
from the one person who knows that we dabbled in theater last year. We did a show at the at Miami New Drama at the Colony on Lincoln Road called Confessions of a Cocaine Cowboy, inspired by our documentary Cocaine Cowboys. Of course, thank you, Annika, so much for coming out and supporting that. Well, first of all, I don't know what the future of live theater holds. I think it's an interesting mystery in these zombie apocalypse times that we are in now. But I will tell you that I've had some interest in reviving Confessions of a Cocaine Cowboy, and I've been very interested in actually working with some of the composers from the Dawg Fight documentary and doing a Hamilton-esque hip-hop musical, rap musical, based on our backyard fighting documentary, Dawg Fight. So that is something that we've been very interested in exploring. So perhaps a hip-hop musical is in our future.
all right. Someone just wrote in, I don't know who this is, that Broadway will be demolished and rebuilt as an Amazon fulfillment center.
That's not true. It will also be a Whole Foods fulfillment center as well. So it'll be part Amazon, part Whole Foods, which I guess is really one and the same anyway, or irregardless, as we say in Miami, because we are illiterate. But I use it ironically.
It's so funny. Okay. So if there's no more lightning questions, please feel free to email me at any time. And, I really want to thank Dan and Merle Weiss for supporting this program for us and allowing us to have great talks with people like Billy Corben. Billy, I really, really appreciate you coming on. I wish we had more time today. But, basically cocainecowboys.com will get us to links to see your films, everything we talked about today. Is that the best way?
Jackie, I did put a link on the chat to rakontur.com, so people can click on that, as well as a link to become a member if you're not a member of the museum. So they're right next to each other. So we do appreciate Billy and his grandparents. I know they made a nice donation today in honor of him being here.
Oh, thank you.
And thank his father for, here, say hi.
Hi.
Dad got all dressed up. That's Dad actually calls that a tuxedo. Those are the nicest clothes Dad owns. I'll have you.
It's all I wear now.
Yeah, that is his iguana hunting uniform. Is what that is.
That's true.
And I want to shout out Dan and Merle Weiss too, who I think I've never met, but if you're a Miamian, as I am, you see their names all the time at all the most wonderful places and things. And so I remember my grandfather once said to me, who's a very generous and philanthropic man, he said, my greatest regret in life is that I didn't make more money so that I could give more money away, because there are so many worthy causes. And I feel like the Weisses are always ahead of the game on that, and I always see them and their names everywhere you would hope people's names. And so I want to just shout out and say thank you to them.
Thank you. Dan and Merle, are you here? Can you unmute yourselves and say hello?
No.
I know they were here before.
Hiding. They must be hiding.
They're here. Hi.
Oh, they're here. They're
Oh.
We're here. We're in our car.
Oh, that's dangerous. Don't do that.
Pulled over. We really enjoyed it. And Billy, we have met you before at a Miami Film Festival event. We were behind you in line, but you were a kid then. You were like, I don't know, 17, 18 years old. But I do remember you, and we're big fans, and thank you so much.
Well, thank you, and drive safe, please.
Danny's driving and I'm talking. As usual. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much.
I'm going to add one more thing. First of all, my staff knows this. There's nothing I love more than grammar humor. So I really appreciated the grammar humor at the end. But possibly I'm going to extend this. Maybe you can come back someday for round 2. Hopefully we'll be doing these for a long time. And since we've run out of time today, maybe we could welcome you back another day if you'd be willing.
It would be my pleasure. And we'll have a new, like I said, a new project is coming up in October.
Great.
We'll have a new trailer and a new movie. And it is going to be of tremendous local, national, and international interest. So I'm sure a lot of people will have a lot to say and ask about it.
And maybe he'll have a haircut by then too.
Doubtful. It'll be down to my
Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone for coming
Thank
today.
you. Thanks, Billy.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy.
Bye.